Okay, so Joann, thanks very much for coming today. So we're just doing a podcast today to talk about healthcare and innovation here in Northern Ireland. So do you maybe just want to introduce yourself just for the audience?
Yeah, so I'm Joann Rhodes. I'm Chief Executive of the Health Innovation Research Alliance Northern Ireland, and we lead the life sciences cluster here, and that's all about developing relationships between academia, industry, health and government to think about how we can accelerate commercialisation and adoption of new medical breakthroughs to reach patients.
Okay, and my name is Roisin Molloy and I'm the CEO and co-founder of TriMedika. We're a medical device manufacturer based here in Belfast, so we're a member of Hirani, who do fabulous work in helping to raise the issues in healthcare here in Northern Ireland. So, Joann, can you just maybe share your journey in healthcare and medical technology and sort of talk about how your experiences have shaped your approach to healthcare innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually a pharmacologist by training. So I started off in the labs at Pfizer, developing new medicines and working on cell therapies. And then through the years have developed relationships with academic institutions, and actually after the financial crash moved my lab from Pfizer up to the National Heart and Lung Institute in London. And it became apparent to me that a lot of intellectual property and new ideas are coming through academia, but there wasn't a joined up space for developing that further into a commercialized landscape and actually developing engagement with industry who asked very different questions. So that sort of gave me the first idea on the road to think about how do we align strategic relationships between industry, academia and the clinic, and then thinking through actually what are the questions we need to ask or innovators need to ask in order to develop their technologies further on. And then subsequent to that, I've been Chief of Staff at Merck R&D as they move their UK discovery arm for diseases of aging into the Crick Institute in London. And again, that was very much thinking about innovation, but actually some of the barriers to innovation between large companies and academic institutions working together is all around people and culture, and so have developed that further. And then moving to Northern Ireland during the pandemic back in 2020, moved my whole family over here, which was a really exciting experience, and really got to lift the hood on the innovative sector here in Northern Ireland, but think about how I could bring my network that I developed over the years to support the commercialisation, the growth and also the adoption so that these medical breakthroughs could reach patients.
Super. I mean, funny, I didn't know you started off in Pfizer because I started in Pfizer as well
Okay.
in the labs. I was one of those people in a white coat down in Sandwich in Kent.
Yeah, that's where I was too.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Probably there around the same time. So, but you're right in saying that what industry needs and what sort of academia is offering is two different things. We as a sort of company and manufacturer, maybe industry linked, our challenge then is getting the innovation into hospitals and getting that into the healthcare segment where patients can actually benefit from the innovation.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly where our business started was I had a personal sort of experience with a family member, and that's where my journey started on developing a thermometer that didn't have to wake a patient, didn't have to, this patient, she was basically going through chemotherapy and she was getting wakened every 20 minutes to take a temperature. So small things and small innovations that can really make the patient's journey very different. And it's one thing we as a company put first is look at the patient experience first, then move to the user. So we work a lot with the nurses. So we have a lot of information working directly with them. The actual device itself was actually developed by nurses talking to them. So it's translating that innovation right through to where it's being used in healthcare, and making sure that, as you say, all these different pieces, the academia, industry, and then the actual hospitals themselves speak different languages.
Yes.
So it's great to have an organisation like Hirani for us here in Northern Ireland to try and sort of get across all those barriers and bring it all together.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say, because translation is often thought of in one way, which is translating ideas through to IP and through to commercial products that then can help benefit patients. But actually there's translation of culture, translation of ideas, and that translation of how you actually move those ideas through. Everyone has their different language. the piece that I sort of discovered when I was at Imperial College was around really understanding the different drivers and challenges that the different groups have. And I wondered if that's something that you've looked into as part of TriMedika, as about how you meet the needs of all those organisations.
Oh, I mean, 100%. It was, so even if you've so we have a thermometer, and just for the sake of it, while it's sitting on we have a non-contact thermometer, and you literally point at the forehead and you get a readings. Now, we can show from this that you don't touch the patient, so there's a much lower infection risk of transfer of any contamination. You don't use any plastic consumables, so there's huge cost savings, time savings for the nurses using it, because they don't have to go and find plastics, dispose of plastics, and so on. But even with all of those benefits, then there were other challenges. So the other challenges were for the actual, even say the procurement within the hospitals, they have a way of purchasing. So you had to think about how those purchasing sort of infrastructures were set up and how you move into those. You had to make it easy for the nurses to use. And there was so many different things that we had to think about. And when we were going to market with this initially, we're going to bring a connected device to market. When we actually did our research in the hospitals at that point in time, many years ago, they didn't have the back-end infrastructure. So bringing a connected device wouldn't have added any extra benefit. So you're quite right. There's other things than just the technology and that you have to think about. And they all speak different languages. So it's always a challenge. But you know, this is what we're there for. But and so Joann, can I ask, just with your knowledge of the market and your background in sort of pharma and so on, how do you see technology in helping with the innovation in healthcare itself? What do you think are the key drivers and the key things that are coming through that are going to really change the game for healthcare?
So I think as I've come through from pharma, very much focused on medicines, and now coming into the Northern Ireland cluster and thinking through the innovations that are there, what I can really see is an integration between the data assets that we may have, and I know there's a lot of work building there with respect to rolling out e-health records, but then there's other data in the community as well around how people are living their lives, and they're developing that through Fitbits and things like that. However, there's the day-to-day business of healthcare as well. So I think these two things are coming together and integrating. Where I think the biggest strides are going to be made in the near term is how we think about using that day-to-day data, more administrative data, I think, around whether people miss their appointments, how can we think about utilising the resources that we have effectively. And there are many platforms that are out there that can sort of help the administration. But then the next layer on to that is, how does our patient population engage with that? So how can we triage those people so the right people are getting seen at the right time, and that we can really streamline the patient experience. And I think that and also the staff's experience, and I think that often gets overlooked in when we're thinking about adopting innovation, is whether it's actually going to reduce staff time but improve their experience. So I think the major breakthroughs in the near term are going to be very much around integrating that with the data. When we look further afield, I think products are moving more into the consumer space, and we all saw during COVID we were using lateral flow tests. We need to think about how our patients use their diagnostics, how maybe they're used in care homes and in the community, and how we can make sure that we develop that virtuous circle. So we're being pushed on reducing carbon emissions and sustainability. Keeping people out of hospital is obviously going to impact that positively, and then keeping people out of hospital is going to improve the patient experience because they don't want to be in hospital, and then it's going to obviously free up some clinical time to really work with the patients that are needed. So I think the integration is where we're going to see the most movement in the coming years.
And I think one thing that's been raised quite a lot recently is about efficiencies in the hospitals and sort of just, getting more patients through and reducing waiting lists and so on. And that's where the data piece comes in. So when you have that information available to you, because even, for example, for a device like ours, when it's connected, it gives you so much extra pieces of information of where the patient was, the nurse has been taking the temperature, what date and time it was taken at, and so on. So you're getting all of that information automatically fed into the patient record, and therefore you can get a better sort of tally of what the patient has been through. So that's all bearing into what, and this is all aligned with what hospitals have on all of their requirements, which is reduce costs, reduce times, reduce infections, and get connected. So it is moving that direction, and I think that the hospitals are looking at that. But as Chief Executive of Hirani, Joann, could you share some success stories in enabling organisations to provide these healthcare solutions?
So absolutely, what we've done over the last few years in Hirani is thinking about how we overcome the barriers. You said it brilliantly yourself earlier. It's bringing those people together who are closest to the problem. So Hirani is very much a convener for people from different parts of the sector. And so we've thought about the people who are closest to the problem. So very recently, or over the last 2 years, we have incorporated the Clinical Entrepreneur Programme into the Northern Ireland healthcare system. This is around upskilling the workforce, so people who are closest to the problem, who really want to understand how they can develop solutions. It gives them the skills and the language to be able to go and talk to many different stakeholders across the healthcare industry, but also within their own hospitals, to think about how they can adopt and develop innovation. We've got 20 clinical entrepreneurs in Northern Ireland at the moment, and they're right the way from nurses, GPs, physiotherapists, anaesthetists, and social workers, so really across the whole field. And I think that's one of the strengths that we have in Northern Ireland. We've got integrated health and social care, so a lot of social care challenges we can bring to the fore. So that's a real success story. And what we've started to see is this coalition of the willing. So there's a network now that we can make sure that we connect in with different parts of the sector. So real world challenges get spoken about much more. And I think that we've seen that's been hugely successful. The one other thing I'd be really keen to share as well is that since we've set up Hirani, we were able to become a voice and a front door for the sector in Northern Ireland, which means we were successful in bidding for the Innovate UK launchpad funding, which brings £7 million into the businesses of Northern Ireland. And I know there are real opportunities for innovators in this sector to bid in for funding that gets them not only to their first £500,000, but actually then helps them lead to next bits of funding, but also crucially gets that knowledge exchange. And it's allowed us to convene groups from companies like yourself who have been there and done it and can feed back some of their knowledge back to earlier innovators, but also gives us an opportunity for people from the global network to really look at the Northern Ireland ecosystem and say, there's things going on there. You've got a border with Europe, and you're within the UK as well. So it's really allowed us to galvanise and point to the strengths of our sector, which I think will prove really a really good opportunity to invest in the future.
I totally agree with you. I mean, it's so important to bring all that together. But what do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities for innovation in healthcare? What's the biggest thing that's sort of holding that back, or that could propel it forward?
Yeah. So I think we need to have a more joined up conversation. It needs to be much more transparent about how you develop products for market. And really, it comes back to regulation. I've spent a lot of my life thinking I don't need to worry about regulations and move away from it. But actually, the older I get, the more interested I become in standards and regulation. And I think it's particularly in healthcare in Northern Ireland, we have to work with the Medicines Health Regulations Agency for developing medical breakthroughs. They have been very much concerned with safety, which is hugely important. But I think in order to harness the opportunity for us to become a life sciences superpower, is think about how the MHRA can support innovative business and actually engage early. And I think there's a lot we can learn from other regulators, especially the FDA, and also developing in the EMA, how they can actually work early on with innovators to really help them move forward as they commercialise their products. So that's one piece. the other piece that I think we really need to get comfortable with is that there needs to be health needs to come together with many different stakeholders. So we need to provide that sort of transparent language and that I guess cultural opportunity for people to really begin to discuss the problems that they have. And so it comes back down to trust and developing trust there. So if we can help people understand how they discuss their problems and challenges, then we can think about how we address them, and also create the wider landscape where they can look into the whole piece. Will the finance group, fund adoption of these devices? Is it going to work for staff? Is it going to be adopted by patients? And is it actually going to change the outcomes for the disease? And ultimately, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention health economics. So what I'd also like to look at or help people look into is not just measuring sort of the front end cost, but actually how does the adoption of innovation reduce costs further down in the supply chain, up in the supply chain and further down in the care pathway, and really think holistically, because ultimately budgets for health are not going to go up. So we actually have to do more with less and support patients better. So I think there's some real opportunities to get people together in small working groups and create some quick wins there when we adopt opportunities into the healthcare sector.
Yeah. And it's something that we've come across in healthcare as well, from like a company selling into the hospital organisations, is they're calling it, we've heard the term flat cash, so getting more from the same amount of money. But sometimes we can go in and we can show them how we can save money, can save time and so on. But it's that getting the right people around the table is the difficult bit, and making sure people can see. We did some work with some of the hospitals on like a whole life cost saving economics piece. And we showed that we could save this organisation, was an 800-bed hospital, about 17 nurse FTEs a year. I mean, that's a significant saving for any hospital. And we always hear about the sort of lack of nurses and so on. And it's also to support the nurses on the ground with better technology, that they have more time to care for the patient, rather than sort of filling out forms and doing all of the other stuff which they generally don't like to do. But just on your point with the regulatory piece, we are an international company, so we sell into 21 countries. So we're across the MDR in Europe, we're FDA in the US, and then now the UKCA in the UK. And that has put considerable obstacles in the way of technology. And it's not really that you won't get there, it just is pushing out the timescales to get the innovation. So it's, from our perspective, when we can show those savings that hospitals not want, but they actually need to make a system work, that we can't get them delivered. And I know there's the FDA have some moves at the minute where they're actually trying to reduce that time scale. And I know there's a lot of chat around a lot of manufacturers to talk with the powers that be to get that sorted for the rest of Europe. But these are all the challenges that we see a lot of. And in the hospitals, another piece we hear a lot is the change management piece, which is just about, as you say, getting the willing together to actually make this happen and getting that front door, which for us in Northern Ireland has been Hirani, and it has helped quite a bit for us to get those, even just getting the conversations and the right people around the table. So it's so important for healthcare adoption and adoption of innovation.
Absolutely. And I think just bringing the piece back to, we're investing a lot of money in companies through public sector grants to start their innovations. If we then become a user of those innovations, it also creates economic development and prosperity for the region. What we need to do, though, also is allow those companies to scale. And so removing those barriers is going to create jobs in the future. And one of the ways I like to look at it is we can start. There are 10 startups, let's say, in Northern Ireland. The first 10 jobs are usually very high level jobs. They're business professionals, they're clinicians, they're professors or academic scientists, usually commanding quite high salaries. But then you scale that company as it develops from 10 people to 100 people. The next 90 jobs are going to be across all levels. So if we're talking to our politicians and saying, how are we going to create opportunities at all levels for good jobs for people locally, thinking about scaling those companies and leveraging the investment we've already made is absolutely critical to creating those jobs. Then the final piece is people in jobs tend to be healthier. So it creates yet another positive feedback loop, which is people who people are healthier, they're productive, and then they are active members of society. So it create, and then they're going to not form a queue outside their hospitals to then go and get healthcare. So we've got all of these sort of positive waves that we can kick off, and it obviously starts with the innovation and starts with convening that group, but it's thinking through how we can double down on supply chains. And I know you've worked with local companies, which is fantastic. So to think through how we can really build from the medical breakthrough into economic prosperity as well. So that's the key part, and the message I guess I'd like to send to healthcare professionals is, and academics as well. The research that they're doing is around how they can provide something back to their local sector, and they're an economic anchor. Then it's not just all about research, it's actually about implementation. So I think that's going to change with people having conversations one-to-one and convening and having these types of conversations, so people realize that they can be part of that success story.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think the sort of challenges with all the systems as well, that, for example, the hospital beds and people waiting in ambulances and so on. Now we've seen this introduction of a complete different system of care delivery, which is in the virtual wards that are now popping up. So we've seen this pretty much across Europe, definitely in the UK and in Ireland. And our device has actually managed to make its way into the virtual wards because it's easy to use, because it's it doesn't have consumables and stuff. But have you seen this with other companies and with the healthcare organisations? Because they're going to have to rethink how care is delivered. And I know in some of the countries, other countries we work in, the idea is to only bring them to hospital if it's really, really necessary. Whereas we're sort of in a situation now where most people are referred to hospital, and then they have to go through a pathway. Do you see that changing, and what do you think the impact of that's going to be?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, and it's a really challenging change management problem that we're going to have to overcome, because a lot of the healthcare is actually sick care, isn't it, within hospitals? And potentially why we're seeing primary care being having a lot of patients is because people are able to understand their care more. They're able to read on the internet, and they're developing. They want to be empowered to look after themselves. So I think that there is a real challenge with how we transform that. Something I'm really, really passionate about is this equity of access. So it's not just the people that can afford some of these devices and afford to look after themselves. And I'd be really interested in thinking about how do we support the people that go to the GP the most, even if we can drop their visits down from maybe they go once a week, perhaps we can drop them down to once a month because they've got care at home. I think that will be really important. The key part to that is triage and thinking about managing risk. So I have seen some really interesting ideas where healthcare trusts have put GPs in A&E to actually triage patients, because they're much more able to manage risk. And they can think about whether a patient needs to be admitted or not, whereas A&E tends to cover all risks, and therefore they're much more likely to admit people. But I'd really like to see, for the equity of access, people feeling confident that they can manage their care themselves. And I think part of that is around upskilling not only our healthcare professionals but also society in general to know when they need to go to hospital or not. So I absolutely think that I would rather be treated at home if I can. And so that there are really important obstacles that we need to overcome with that. It's only going to take this coalition of the willing and thinking about how we speak to the whole landscape across health and well-being, including our communities and charities, as well as up into staff and hospitals and government. We're going to have some really big conversations about how we manage that.
No, 100%. I think with the whole sort of virtual ward situation, I think for many patients at the minute, they feel that if they go home, they fall out of the system, and then they're going to have a challenge to get back in there again. Whereas the virtual ward connect piece keeps them within the system, albeit they're at home looking after themselves. So it's a it's a win-win on both sides. Yeah. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. It's also having that dynamic way of managing care dynamically. So sometimes people get sent home with a care package, and then the care companies will say, I'm not sure these patients, they've now rehabilitated themselves, they don't need care 4 times a day. Yeah. So and how do we make it a very dynamic system where people are able to feedback and actually become much more independent and empowered in their care? So I think digital technologies can help with that, but there's a huge cultural change that we need to think about addressing as well, about where people feel safe and secure to manage their care, and they've got opportunities to triage themselves. They can lift the phone and actually say, this has got worse, I need to be admitted. But you're right, at the moment people maybe feel that they've fallen out of the system, and so there's some real opportunities to think about how we support people better at home.
And I think as well, I mean, most people have a mobile phone, most people do all their banking, most of the shopping, everything on a mobile phone now, and it's that connected piece of the connected health and getting all of your information and feeling sort of empowered on what you've got. How do you think the connected health piece, you've got a lot of experience and background in that, how do you think that is going to help move healthcare forward?
So connected health is very much at the fore at the moment, and you've talked about smartphones. One of the things I'm seeing in Northern Ireland is we're learning a lot from the fintech sector and the financial sector, and how I can connect to my bank on my phone. Why don't I have my medical care records there? And I think that piece is evolving. We have got Encompass rolled out across we 2 trusts now. The second trust it's just started there with the Belfast Trust. But I think there's a lot that we can learn, but there's an educational piece within the digital cluster as to how they can support health and how they can support the integration of some of that cybersecurity and the data analytics piece that needs to go around the back end of that. So having an opportunity to convene wider groups in that also speaks to manufacturers that might bolt onto connected care devices, and really thinking how engineering can understand some of the challenges that health undergo, I think all is a really important piece that we need to develop. What I think that will bring is going back to that virtuous circle. It will bring opportunities for people to become empowered to look after their own care or look after people that they care for, but it's safe in the knowledge that then when they need access to that information, I think that will develop further. I do think artificial intelligence and some of at the moment it's kind of at the chatbot level, which none of us really enjoy, but I do think that's going to develop further. Is AI going to replace our doctors? I really don't think so, but doctors that use AI are going to replace our doctors. And so there is a really important piece there in connected health, so that the healthcare staff and the patients really understand what is the AI helping them do, and how is the AI augmenting what the doctor's decisions may be. The challenge that we have at the moment, and actually it's a wider problem, is I think the healthcare staff and the patients really need to understand how it all works, and there needs to be tighter regulation there. But there's a huge opportunity for us to learn from different parts of the sector, and actually sort of bring them forward into the wider landscape, so that we can develop those new opportunities in connected health.
Yeah, and I think as well, connected health, especially if it reaches into the home as well, from the virtual ward perspective, it's about gathering those data points, because even for us as a manufacturer, one of our challenges in developing a product is what actually is happening on the ground in the ward. So if you're developing every single time you're using a device or or a piece of equipment, you know, that if you have data on that, they can then do like time and motion studies. They can look at all of the different complexities to create what we said earlier on, the question we need to answer, so that we can come up with the solutions that we need to deliver better healthcare. So is a patient being uncomfortable for 20 minutes or half an hour very regularly, does that stop their progression and their healing and everything else? Does it disrupt their sleep? And to your point, does it have more repercussions further down the line? And that's where I think the connected health and the data piece can really fill in the gaps that, you know, you can't see, nobody sees, because they're not there for the whole journey. The only person that's there for the whole journey is the patient. And the patient isn't in a situation, obviously, of maybe having that background in sort of like a doctor would have or a nurse would have. So I think it's putting all of that together. And as I say, even getting that touch point into the virtual ward, into the home of the patient, and maximising that for the patient as well. So the patient's in a better position to sort of have a faster recovery. So it's all very exciting. So moving in the right direction. So so there's collaboration with a lot of different healthcare disciplines for patient care. How do you feel that the healthcare professionals, technologists and entrepreneurs can work together to drive innovation in healthcare, Joann?
So I think they are willing to work together. They're, you know, everyone I meet is very keen to engage and to develop new relationships and new connections. I think what we need to do is to think about how we facilitate that. And it's often thinking, well, these are really nice conversations to have, and you've both identified an area that you might want to work on. Perhaps that's monitoring patients in their own home, or perhaps it's you know, accelerating people's discharge from hospital. How are we then going to work through either a project to develop a new innovation, or what I would like to see is thinking through how there might be technology out there already that could solve their challenge, but just it's 90% of the way there. So I do think that there's a big focus on new, which is important to upskill people to think about how they adopt innovation and how they develop new ideas. But actually, the back end of that is how do we implement something and make sure that it's fit for purpose and monitor the benefits that it brings. So what we do already is convene workshops where different parts of the sector come together. But it was interesting what you said about the data piece. If people have the data there in front of them, then they can start to devise questions. And I think it really comes through developing trust through some of the relationships, and then people can see the data that's being generated, perhaps with a very small project, to then think about wider questions and wider opportunities. The other thing that I would like to see more of with people working together is often new projects or new ideas of medical breakthroughs have been led by an engaged clinician that has got research that they want to solve, and that's fantastic. What I would like to see across healthcare is them thinking through where are their biggest challenges, what are they spending the most money on at the moment, and therefore how can we think about reducing that for them. So I'd like to see a much more sort of top-down approach to small working groups, or which need to be made up of multidisciplinary teams from the clinic, from engineering, from sort of knowledge holders and academics, and all of those facilitators as well, coming together to think about how they can actually save cost. And often that's not just about not buying things. I know our healthcare systems are being pushed to save costs, but actually how can we develop new things or adopt new ideas that are going to save costs and then ultimately increase patient outcomes as well. That's what I'd like to see more of, coming together around a specific problem that's then driven by the major challenges of our healthcare systems.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important. I remember once we were in a hospital, and it was a new hospital, and the nurses were using a device in this case that they had used plastic consumables with, and when they ran out, the nurse says, "I have a 20-minute walk to go and replenish the consumables for the next patient.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to save nurses time, and these poor nurses are having to walk down 2 corridors to get supplies. You know, so it's small things like that that makes such a difference to their everyday and daily tasks that they're doing with patients.
Yeah.
So it's so important to bring all the stakeholders together,
Yeah.
and just get them talking and get the solutions together.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it can be as simple as what did you spend your time doing today, and how we can then create opportunities for different efficiencies in the system. And often the question we pose helps us understand and frame the solution, so we can actually bring design thinking into that as well. And so it is really part of that whole upskilling of different parts of the sector, so that they can really frame their problems effectively and then think about how they go out and get solutions.
So maybe just to finish off then, Joann, is there one big technology or innovation that you see is going to make a huge impact on healthcare that you've seen, or a couple, but is there anything you've seen that's really going to change the game?
So I really think the opportunity, so I think there's a couple there. So one of them that I've seen, so I used to work in diseases of aging a huge amount, and the only way that you can tell whether or not a patient is progressing is through very subjective means. So you ask them questions, and there's questionnaires. There are lots of tools that are used in research at the moment, and there are a number of companies as well who are developing ways to actually read brainwaves, so that we can understand how those patients are progressing. Because the only other way was, unfortunately, you had to wait until people passed away, and then you would be able to see how their brains had succumbed to neurodegenerative disease. So I think there's a really exciting integration between digital biomarkers, but also some of the diagnostics as well. So thinking, rather than developing lumbar punctures for neurodegenerative disease, we can actually use blood biomarkers or saliva, and thinking differently about how people can be sampled. And I think those two technologies will come together, and we will really be able to regularly screen people probably with their smartphone, so that every year they take a measure of their brain health and their brain connectivity. That means we can identify people, whether or not they're declining fast or declining slowly, and then you can start to look at that phenotype of patient and really dig down into where those challenges are. Previously, all we've had are tissue biomarkers or post-mortem samples, and it really doesn't tell us about how the disease starts. It tells us about how the disease ends. So for me, that's really going to change there. So that's one piece that I think is really going to develop further.
Okay, no, I mean, that's really interesting. I'm actually part of an aging societies project, and there's a lot of talk around the sort of the environment that they're living in. So having sensors involved,
yeah.
Looking at the design of the building and how they can put stuff together. They're looking at multi-generational setups within buildings as well, that they can help each other and so on. So it's actually very interesting as we move into an era where the population, the number of people older is going to be exceed the younger population. It's going to be a significant challenge, but all of that side of things is massive for I think all of us, because we're all going to be there at some stage if we're lucky. So listen, Joann, thanks very much for coming in today. It's been really great chatting to you and hearing about all these wonderful things that Hirani's doing. And just thank you for everything Hirani's doing, certainly to help us as a company here in Northern Ireland. So hopefully we will meet up again soon.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been fantastic, and to hear more about your technology as well, and how we can support you further on.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you.